Hey, somebody needs to sharpen the pitchfork tines. You have? Excellent. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. You are listening to the Professional Noticer. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Andrews. Hey, thank you for making me a part of your week. My purpose here today and with every show we do is to play the part of a best friend or a coach. I want to help you live the life of your wildest dreams by giving you access to the greatest mentors the world has to offer today. Speaking of the greatest mentors the world has to offer today, have you joined wisdomharbor.com? For less than $3 a month, you'll have access to original content only found on wisdomharbor.com that will have a positive effect on your family, and that includes your little kids, your teenagers, and your adult children. Dave Ramsey says it's also great for your business and your teams. We utilize video, audio, and the written word. Content is delivered in small bites by Grammy winners, CEOs, comedians, master chefs, best-selling authors, and Hall of Fame speakers. There are even guitar lessons from an award-winning songwriter. So check it out today and join your friends and neighbors who are already a part of wisdomharbor.com. That's wisdomharbor.com. Observations and answers, that's what we do on the Professional Noticer. And, we love it when somebody comes to the table with both. And we love it when somebody comes back to the table with both. And then back again. We have our first third-time guest today, and he has quickly become a favorite of my friends, and he's long been a favorite of mine. New York Times bestselling author Michael Perry. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm up here in the little room over the garage, just getting ready for another day of self-employment.
And what town in Wisconsin are you in now? You're not in New Auburn anymore.
No, I was raised in New Auburn, spent 12 years there as an adult. And then I'm in our address is Fall Creek, Wisconsin, or Fall Creek, depending on how long you've lived here.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm about 40 minutes from the farm I was raised on. Yeah.
Wow. For those of you who don't know or first meeting Michael Perry, Michael had an awesome breakout book that made the New York Times bestseller list called Population 485, Meeting Your Neighbors One Siren at a Time. And I bought the book kind of by accident. I did not know who Michael was. And when I read the book, I was just blown away at how well this guy wrote and how funny he was and how insightful. And I've since read everything he's written, and I have his new book in book form and on Audible. And so his new book is called Hunker, Brief Essays on Human Connection. And you can see it's kind of dog-eared and folded, and you've done it again, man. Tell us about the title of the book. That's an unusual title, Hunker.
Yeah, so Hunker, and I probably do a better job of explaining it in the introduction, so I'm just going to refer to it.
Okay, good.
In the introduction.
In fact, Michael, feel free to read the introduction.
All right, I'll do that. And then
because I love it.
Depending on how things go, I got one in here about chasing chickens too. But,
okay, good.
So as a little background, about 9.5 years ago, I was hired to write a weekly column for the Wisconsin State Journal. And I was always amazed that they hired me to do that because and I say this respectfully, I had wonderful editors there, hardworking people. But if you know anything about the state of the newspaper industry, I said it felt like getting hired to scrape the barnacles off the Titanic. But they were so good to me, and I was blessed to have a good long run there. But that's the background to this introduction. Every week for a while now, and until they don't, I write up a roughneck grace column for the Wisconsin State Journal, and they print it. This book collects pieces published between March 22nd, 2020 and January 9th, 2022. Those dates pretty much coincide with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's a presence in the pieces, but less than you might expect or fear or hope. Each week I wobbled between feeling I was failing to meet the moment and feeling I was a grandiose fool to think anyone was asking. But week after week, slowly at first, then regularly, I received messages, emails, comments, and sometimes even a handwritten note from folks I felt I could trust, readers. In short, they weren't looking to me for advice or a take on the latest news blast or controversy or tragedy or variant. Instead, they said they were grateful for a brief break from it all, something to go with their morning coffee, something to read before bed, something that was anything but that other thing, something to lighten the hunker. To hunker is not to cower. To hunker is to hang in there, to stubbornly persevere, to shore up your little circle, bank your fires, tend to the hearts beating beneath your own roof. Do what needs to be done. Reader, it is my privilege to hunker with you. Yeah, I think
Wow.
I wanted to address that word hunker right out of the gate because it can sound kind of grim, and in some cases it is. And I expand a little more that I realize, I don't speak lightly at all about that particular stretch of time. So many people suffered, but hunker is also a kind of a way of strengthening ourselves and focusing on what matters and who really needs us. And yeah.
You seem to, your career, you seem to choose, wobble is not the right word, but to move.
I think wobble is fine.
Well, you
Ricochet.
Move, yeah, you move from novels to collections of short stuff, which I love that about you. I don't know. I mean, I have gotten tired of some authors before, but I can't imagine getting tired of you because it's always something different. You always surprise me. And for those of you who I have read the book and I've listened to it on Audible, and Michael is narrating it on Audible. So if you like what he just did and you like this chasing chickens thing he's going to do in a little bit, get this book on Audible and get it in real paper, because this thing in real paper, these are short 2-page pieces. And for somebody who, may think they don't like to read, this is a great book.
I had someone say one time, I've had a couple of these short collections, Million Billion and Peaceful Persistence and Roughneck Grace. And a very erudite, thoughtful, reflective gentleman once told me, these are great bathroom books.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Then he got all embarrassed. And I said, man, I don't care where you read them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is, I think it's partly for my own interest too, because the thing, when they asked me to start writing those columns, and they're 600 words long, roughly, and like you said, 2 pages. And at first I thought, I can't do that. 1 a week for 9.5 years, 51 columns a year. But I found that I enjoyed that because it helped me with my longer form stuff. To me, it was almost like a form of calisthenics. You didn't get to sit around and be dreamy. It was like, no, you had a deadline at noon every Wednesday. And it wasn't about if I was in the mood or if I had the right cup of tea or inspiration. It was like, let's see. No, I hurt myself chasing a chicken today. I guess that's the column.
Yeah,
and then it is a delight to go back to those longer pieces and really dwell on them a little more, take more time, revise. And then I really, I've been threatening this for a long time, but it looks like it'll be out the next couple months. And I like writing different things because it makes me examine my own thinking and my own way of living. I have this piece that I've been threatening, a novella that it's all done. I'm just recording the audiobook and we're going to try to get it out in the next 2 months, but it's terribly dark and it's about a farmer losing his farm. And there are things in there that some people will be mad at me about, but it's written from the heart. I'm not telling anybody how to think. I'm trying to think for myself. And part of that is exploring ideas and maybe being wrong and maybe getting, but that's pure fiction, that book. And then I'm turning right back to another extended, long nonfiction book. So yeah, I'm just grateful to be in there swinging. That's the bottom line.
I'm interested. You've in conversations that you and I have had, you've mentioned this book several times, and I'm really, really interested in it. And you say that it's pure fiction, but I want to make a point to our audience that I think about this often because I've done fiction and nonfiction, and I think people never really this never occurs to people, and that is that fiction has to be truer than nonfiction. It has to ring more true because in nonfiction, if somebody says, that the worm got up from the sidewalk and began to talk, you go, well, this is nonfiction. I guess that happened. But if you do that in fiction, people go, that's stupid. That would never happen. Right. And so fiction really has to make sense and ring true. So I'm really interested in reading this.
I'll get you an early copy. The thing is, this type of fiction, this novella, this short piece, I admit, I mean, it's a way for me. So when I write nonfiction, and you and I have talked about this before, I take very seriously my duty to do the very best I can to get the verifiable facts straight. We can all argue forever about truth with a capital T,
right,
IS and things like that. But if I say Herbie Gravender died when he was 92, I've tried to actually find the obituary. And I've also said if I make a mistake and someone finds it, I try to correct it at least acknowledge it in public. So, because if I make a mistake, it's because I'm an idiot. I'm not smart enough I don't have an agenda. I'm just trying to get the next book done. But the novella, there's no question that it's a chance. Some of the things that I'm not sure about how I feel, and so that I, as a person, wouldn't write about it in nonfiction because I don't have any grand declaration. But the character in fiction can explore these things, and if you want to get mad at the character, that's fine. But it is a way. It's in that way. Of course, this is another very old discussion, but of course, fiction is rooted in reality. That's where we draw our experiences from. But yeah, we'll see. I'll shoot you a copy ahead of time, and you can advise me whether to take cover or not. Actually, I sent it out. It deals with very dark themes. It deals with infant death. It deals with suicide. It deals with some social issues. But I sent it to a range of a couple of farmers, a person who works with farmers. I sent it to a person who has struggled with some of the more specific issues. And every single one of them said it's a real, but that it's necessary to talk frankly about these things. So we'll see. And then I'll keep writing goofy chicken stories too. That's the other thing. I think maybe Population 485, which you were kind enough to mention, I just wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that book. I always go back to the fact that is a book that contains all manner of scenes of death and destruction from real life that hurt real people. But then on the next page, you're holding your belly laughing while the one-eyed beagle tells you a lie about how he lost his eye. And someone once said, well, how can you go back and forth? And I said, well, it is life. I mean,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, we're all doing that on a constant basis. So
that's exactly right. And for people who really enjoy thinking, and for people who enjoy somebody who is real, I mean, this book, Hunker, Brief Essays on Human Connection. Sometimes when I'm going to talk to somebody on the air, Michael, I'll think, okay, how would I review this book? How would I review it in a different way? How would I describe it to somebody when everybody else is saying, oh, I couldn't put it down. It's one of you need to read this. I mean, how would I review it to tell? And here's what I came up with. I came up with, where are you going to get a book that in one book, the author talks about Voltaire, John Updike, Henry James, Montaigne, Plato, ice fishing, tomatoes, deer hunting, and cow manure.
Hey, you
That's
do
a
what you
wi-
can. You know?
that's a wide range. That's what they call somebody who has a very wide range.
So I just found an old. This is tangentially related, but I'm in that stage in life where I'm getting rid of stuff so my kids don't have to, and I've been cleaning out a whole bunch of stuff, and I came across a review of one of my. I think it might have been Population 485, and the reviewer said this was a national review too. They said Michael Perry is a new age Hemingway, and I remember thinking, I'm not sure what to think about that. And I'm also not sure how I can ever live it down.
Right. A new age Hemingway.
That's just the kind of thing I want to tell the fellas down at the fire department. You know, if they give me a
Yeah.
hard time, I go, hey, you know, you're dealing with a new age Hemingway here. So
Oh my
sometimes things
gosh.
intended as compliments actually just serve to humble you.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey,
But yeah,
so
I think
you're
again, I just feel I've always felt like I'm playing. I mean, I work hard. I was raised to be humble and self-deprecating. I think you want to be humble because we're all going to fall, and I would like to fall from a low height. But I've also learned lately that, especially with writing, I've been writing for a living for 30 years. I have an employee. I have people who make part of their living off of my work. I've supported with the partnership of my wife. You know, we've supported a family. So I've gotten a little less apologetic lately when some of my logger buddies are like, oh, you're a writer. I'm going, no, yes, but I'm self-employed. I mean, I can buy lumber with my writing dollar, you know. But I'm self-deprecating. And one of the self-deprecating things I say is that despite the work, I do feel like I'm playing hooky every day. And part of the excitement of that is being able to, well, why not mention what I just read about Voltaire in terms of how it relates to log splitters, right? So,
right.
because
Right.
I also got to split logs to make firewood for the cold winter ahead. So,
I just, and this is, well, I will do that in a minute. First of all, I just want to ask you, I can't get this off my mind. When we talked beforehand, you said that you're here for a couple of days, but then you're on the road again for a long stretch. You spend a lot of time on the road.
yeah. Now, one thing, and I have written about this in one of my books somewhere. I love the phrase "on the road" because it sounds. People imagine me dieseling through the night in a shiny tour bus and throngs of fans and you know, maybe a Bob Seger tune playing in the background. In fact, it's me in a 2002 Toyota van with all the seats ripped out and the cargo net behind my head just so I don't get killed by my own books, which would be a profound literary irony. But yeah, I've developed a long time ago. I just realized I'm not a million seller. I have a very a lovely audience, and they're pretty loyal. And if I keep at it, I can do it. But combining the fact that I'm not a million seller with the state of the publishing industry in general, I just sort of realized a long time ago I should have what the business people call multiple revenue streams. And I think you know about that. And so one of the things I started doing years ago, I know it's hard to believe if you've ever seen me perform or sing or speak or even do these interviews, but I'm extremely shy. I would prefer never to come out of this room. If I run into someone at the grocery store and they start talking and drawing attention to me, I get literally sweaty and uncomfortable. But I realized a long time ago that if I wanted to help people, especially, so I don't spend a lot of times in standard literary circles either. And so if I go to a firefighting conference, which I've done many, many times, and I'm the speaker, if before the conference I say, how many of you here would like to buy a nonfiction memoir? Like nobody will raise their hand. But if I get 50 minutes to tell firefighting stories that A, are humorous, B, are heartfelt, and C, they realize that I don't put myself off as an expert, but they do come to understand, oh, he really has made an interior attack. He really does know how to put on his SCBA. Then I sell 150 copies of that book in 20 minutes after that. And so I just realized a long time ago that if I could turn my books into speaking events or performances, I can get paid to write the book. I can get paid to talk about the book, and then I can sell those books at those events. And so I would say 90% of me being on the road is within the Wisconsin state lines. And it's mostly me in that old van. And, the last 2 weeks was a perfect example. I did a signing in an independent bookstore where I did a reading and then signed books, classic literary book tour sort of situation. I keynoted a speech. I keynoted a conference of nursing managers because I have a nursing degree, so I can relate there. And then I did a one-man show in a little theater in a mid-sized college town, sold out. And and then the other night I was up in a tiny little town in northern Wisconsin talking to a theater they're trying to save and rehab, and it was about half full, and we had a wonderful time, and I had to carry all my books up a whole flight of stairs and back down. So it's that kind of thing. And then throw in, I have a band too, and we do about 8 to 15 gigs a year. It's just, again, it gets back to why I like the different kinds of writing. There's always something to keep me interested, and it's never the super shiny thing, and it's never the famous thing or sell a million thing. But it's the thing where if I just keep hustling, we make a nice living. I put a post. I have a sneezingcow.com is my website. And I don't think we put it on the website, but if you go to the website, you can find out I have an Instagram too. That too is Sneezing Cow, and Facebook, Sneezing Cow. And I put up a video yesterday that I admit I shot while driving, but I did it for just like 3 seconds. And then
only 3 seconds.
Right. Of my windshield wiper. I was coming home, I'm on the road. I'm an entertainer. It's exciting, flashy. I was coming home from the gig in the middle of the night up in northern Wisconsin. It started raining and my windshield wiper disintegrated. And so the next morning there's a video on my Facebook and Instagram right now of the windshield wiper has basically deteriorated and into strips, and it's whipping in the wind. And I said, well, technically it is wiping the windshield. So I mean, yesterday included a stop at the Napa store to get, I don't know if I'm supposed to drop names. The reason I go to that one is because I know the guy who owns it. And even that, I'm just rambling now. This isn't even remotely related to what you were talking about, but just that I had to stop and get new windshield wipers, and I happen to know the guy who owns the store, and so we got my windshield wipers. He came out and put them on, and then we stood and shot the breeze for 20 minutes about raising kids, kids in college, kids going away. Have we done the right thing? Do we need to do more? Should we do less? And I love that too, in that I'm living in a place where, it wouldn't do me any good to pretend I was a big deal. I don't want to anyway. And I would far rather, he literally, so I wrote a while back, I wrote a piece, and I do bits when I do my live humor performances about, I have no problem letting people know that, this, I'm wearing the cap for comfort, not for any sort of camouflage. But I wrote about how I used to have lots of hair, and then it got to a point where it was so thin, it's the way the light was hitting. I was like, dude, you just got to cut it off. And so I cut it off. I walk into this Napa store the other day, and the owner that I've known for so long, he looks a little different. I can't quite figure it out. And then he like takes him 10 minutes into our conversation to get up his nerve. And he goes, I got to tell you, I read that thing about cutting your hair off. He goes, I was all balding and wispy, and I was still trying to grow it out and kind of let it float. And he's got it all cut off now. He goes, I just want you to know it was your book that got me to do this. But like, I didn't go in looking for that or expecting that, but it's just a hilarious real life boots on the ground moment.
Yeah, man. There's what an influencer.
That's what I am.
You're an influencer.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh my God. Hey, I got a couple of writing questions, because we've had people that have sent us questions that they would like to hear you answer. And so I chose 2 of them. One is, somebody wants to know, because you have a style that is very unusual, but it is all your own. I don't know what my style is, but I do know that my first couple of books, the editors just like gave me all kinds of grief about too many exclamation points. You know, you putting too much in italics, and now that the books sell, they let it all go because they say that's my style. You know, that's your style. So you know, a lot of errors is your style. So so this person wants to know, how do I find an effective style to write?
So I never have definitive answers. Everything is a tangent and a ramble with me. But the one thing that I started saying years ago that I still believe is that finding your voice as a writer is a passive rather than an active process. Because I think, and I did this early on, you can read writing where you go, oh, I see that person is trying to have this voice. They're trying to have us envision a certain type of person talking here. And so when I say passive, what it was for me was a good, I would say 8 to 9 years of serious daily writing combined with tons of reading, combined later in the game with talking and performing pieces. And you go into open, and by the way, I didn't start by having little theaters have me. I went to open mic poetry readings and hung out with the poets and had no idea what I was doing, but I'd read excerpts or I would read poems that I wrote that weren't very good. But for me, style, I've never worked at it actively. I can trace it back to many different things. I'll give 2 concrete examples. One concrete example is being in the implement store, listen to the old timers shoot the breeze and lie and tell. My father, a quiet, reticent, thoughtful, reflective farmer who shuns any sort of attention and yet is one of the funniest storytellers I've ever heard, because he just quietly would tell us stories when we were kids about something that happened. And it would always build and it would unfold and it would twist and it would turn. And then at the end, there'd always be a payoff, and the payoff would be natural. Most of the time it was funny, not always, but it wasn't contrived. And so I can't codify what he taught me. I can't put it on a chart, but I listened to that and I listened to those old timers. And the other very specific example I'll give about it being a passive, by passive, I mean, you're absorbing, you're letting things wash over you and a few things stick or absorb. And there's a writer, he's gone now. His name was Jim Harrison. I've probably brought him up before, but he was mostly a novelist, but he too wrote, his nonfiction is what really changed my life as a writer, not as a human, but his technique. And he wrote Legends of the Fall, which became the very famous movie. And he was, you know, as a person, I always say he's like, to me, Jim Harrison is like Steve Earle. I'm glad they live that way so I don't have to. I love their art, but I just couldn't keep up with them as people. But Jim Harrison had this thing where he would go on these, he'd be writing about ice fishing in Michigan. Then there'd be white space, and he'd all of a sudden be drinking a $500 bottle of wine in southern France with the nephew of some duke. And then all of a sudden he's in Montana fly fishing, and then you're back, he's eating in France, and then you're back ice fishing in Michigan at the end of the piece. And he taught me that you can take these leaps and you can go from place to place. And in this case, I'm talking geography, but, you know, subject wise, topic wise. And as long as when you get to the end, it makes sense, the reader will go with you. And then the last item, so that was huge for me because I used to try to write very seamlessly and take the reader by the hand. And ultimately that's a form of condescension. And I wasn't realizing it. And Harrison taught me, no, you can take these leaps. The third thing that comes to mind is a writer named John McPhee. And he had this technique that I blatantly lifted. And that is, he would write these long, dense paragraphs, very full of detail, but attention to rhythm and how they unfolded. But then at the end, often there would be a 4 or 5 word sentence or phrase. So it was almost like you had this long jazz solo, and then you get to the end of the paragraph and you get the nice little ba-dum-bum. And so I'm citing these specifics just to show you that not any one of those things represents my voice, such as it is, but they all contributed to it. And it wasn't because I sat down and marked them out. It was just the accumulation of time. So I think letting yourself go with unfettered, free writing, just letting stuff spill out. The other thing, I have a daughter who struggled terribly with dyslexia and a couple of other learning disabilities. And I'm just so proud of her right now because she's a senior in college and she's doing great. And the reason I'm proud of her is because I know how hard it has been for her. It's one thing to be the superstar that has always overachieved. But in her case, I just remember trying so hard to help her write. My printer just came alive all by itself over there. I don't know if you can hear that, but if you see it come into the picture, then we got a whole different thing going on. Be time to start writing science fiction. But my daughter, I remember sitting, and this, I really will stop here. This will be my last bit of advice about voice, but I watched it work for my daughter. We were sitting one day and all she had to do was write an index card, but she just couldn't. And this is not a lazy kid. She's weeping with effort. And I said, well, what are you trying to say? And she told me, and she has always been a very well-spoken child. And she gave me this beautiful description of what she was trying to write. And I said, did you hear what you just said? Just write that down. That's writing. There's this artifice, people want to put an artifice to writing when indeed it's just about talking. Now, I said I'd stop, so I will stop with one more thing. The other thing you need to learn to do is what I'm not doing here in real time, which is edit yourself.
Oh my gosh. That's an awesome answer. Now, I've got one more question.
Yeah.
And this is one that I'm really curious about your answer to this. I know what my answer would be, but when you're writing a novel, do you have to write it in order?
Oh, yeah, I love that question. I'm going to go kill the printer and I'll be right back and answer.
Okay.
There. It won't do that again. So
probably won't do anything again.
That's right. Writing anything in order is profoundly difficult for me. For the sake of expediency, I want to point out I am not speaking lightly because I've had a child struggle mightily with this. And I've never been diagnosed, but I'm clearly have a lot of ADHD stuff. I can't keep anything straight in my head. Everything skips all over. I'm constantly going off on tangents. Thankfully, I've found a way to channel that. But when I write books, whether they're nonfiction or fiction, I have a terrible time. And fiction is especially hard for me because with nonfiction, you can do the Jim Harrison thing I just talked about. You can just jump here, there, and the other. And you can do that in fiction, but you must never lose the thread throughout the book. And I wrote a book. I remember writing The Jesus Cow and The Scavengers, which are the only two fiction books that I've done. It was really hard. I'd have to go back and read and reread. And people would say, well, outline. I go, well, I try that, but I just can't stick with it. And then something changes. And then the rest of the outline doesn't work anymore. So what I wind up doing is quite literally printing stuff out and cutting it up with scissors. And I do that very early in the process. I lay it out across tables. If you dig around on my website, I've got pictures of this. I don't know how you'd find it. I guess just search writing or something. But I literally move things around. I call it a desperate game of literary solitaire. And I start very early in the process, like just for a nonfiction book, I'll have pages and pages of just notes, and I'll just cut those up, sometimes even just a sentence fragment. But when you lay it all out, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I wrote this thing here about bow hunting for carp. That actually relates to what Voltaire said about food, right? And so you move that over there, and then the clumps get more and more clumpy. This is all very literary. And then eventually I start doing chapters, or in a fiction book. Yeah, I can read the whole thing. I sometimes tape chapters together in a long scroll and read them without stopping. Now, this is a really silly, dumb, and slow way to work. I don't recommend it, but it's the only thing that works for me. But yeah, writing things in order is, I I wish I had the quick answer. I know people. Jim Harrison, the guy I keep mentioning, he would write his novels and novellas. He wrote them on legal pads. He would start at the beginning and he would write. And this guy, I mean, he wrote some novels that were like 400 or 500 pages long. He would start at the beginning and he would write until he was done. And then he would go through it one time. And I've read his stuff and you couldn't tell he'd only been through it one time. But I'm not wired that way. And so that's another part of, now we're back to finding your voice. Just know who you are. And I am not, unfortunately, that writer. So I don't have a really easy answer other than do whatever it takes. And in my case, it's about actually making physical copies of the stuff so that you can, I used to pin things to the wall too, or some people use index cards. I'm working on a project right now that may or may not see the light of day. It'll come into play with the chicken piece, but that involves working with film people and been writing with them. And that's been fun to see how they work. And we literally sat in a room for 2 days with a huge white wall and colored index cards. And it ain't rocket science, man. They just tape index cards to the wall and move them around.
I'm the only other person you're the only other person I've ever heard of other than me that cuts strips, that prints it out, cuts strips, and then puts them. I have my ping pong table just covered in strips. And so that I can look, because I keep notes all the time.
Yes.
I'm thinking of stuff, and so I'll pull off the side of the road and write it. And I'll think, that would be a good thing for Jones to say in a certain situation. And so then I've got these things, and I'll have them all out. Yeah.
I think it's either that it's just you and me with our particular brain damage, or a lot of people do it and just won't admit it.
That may be true. Because I have a hard time thinking, because I'm ADD too, and I have been diagnosed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not an undiagnosed person.
Right.
I
think the story I tell, I've never been diagnosed. My daughter has, and again, it's such a tricky thing to talk about too, because it's kind of like the back pain of mental disabilities, is that some people have horrific, debilitating back pain, and it's a tragedy. And then there's a few people where you go, I think he just doesn't want to run a pitchfork.
Right.
And ADHD, ADD, that, I'm well aware that, it's been overdiagnosed. It can be used as an excuse for everything. But I've watched a child who wants nothing more than to succeed and work hard, fight and struggle with it. And so I never speak lightly about it. But when she was being officially diagnosed, as I said, I've never been diagnosed. But as the guy was going down the list with my wife and me, my wife just kept looking at me going,
yeah, same thing. Because Adam, our youngest, when he was diagnosed, they're telling us these things, and as he tells, Adam does this, and Adam will see things this way, and I'm kind of thinking, well, I kind of see things that way, and then you'll say, well, and Adam will do this, and you'll sometimes see him do this, and I'm thinking, well, I sometimes do that, and then I finally said, some of these things that you're mentioning about Adam, I have had some of the same experiences. And the doctor said, oh yeah, I spotted you when you walked in the door.
Right. Yeah.
But he asked, he said, maybe you'd like to be tested so that your 11-year-old, well, dad got tested too. And I mean, I just I destroyed the machine, I think.
Sure.
But anyway, before you read the chicken thing, I want to make one more point. And I mean, just how many different angles could I tell you that I'm a fan of Michael Perry? But one of the things that I think, and maybe it's my ADD, but I like books. I like to read things that start off with something that catches me. I don't like to struggle through 6 pages before I find out something, or before I can. And so Michael Perry is one of the best. And I've just before we got on the air here, I just grabbed this and went through and I marked 4. These are our first lines of these pieces. And so I just listened to these first lines. Last night, I stayed up until midnight shucking beans. That's just a great first line. It tells you what's going on. And there's a lot of curiosity there about why you might do that. I love this one. I heard the cranes before I saw them, high as they were in the sky, pale sandhills strung loosely across the blue, their wings underlit by the late afternoon sun, each a soft strobe as it flapped. Now, the same guy who wrote that wrote, last night I stayed up until midnight shucking beans. And then this is just such a great thought. Humility can be cultivated or imposed.
Yeah, I've learned that.
What a great line. And then here's the last one that I picked. And because I think this is just a great example of your thinking on display, which I love this, because this is one of those kind of things that I think a lot of people have thought this, but to put it in a sharply worded way, it's like the perfect piece of music about what everybody has had this thought. So here it is. A few years have passed since I last tent camped, and the irony struck me at dawn. While I have never been more well padded, I have never felt the earth more sharply. Put in terms of inverse proportion, apparently, as I get softer, the ground gets harder. That is awesome. That is awesome. Hey, do you have time to read your chicken piece?
Yeah. Let me put on the old cheaters and find it here. One little bit of background info on this one. I alluded to it already, but just so that it kind of heightens the reference, I mentioned in here being in some meetings, and I mentioned a little fish out of water. These meetings took place in Los Angeles in very fancy place, and it had to do with film deals and the people in the room. I have done just the other night. I can do 45 minutes on things that I've had to teach people from the coast. But I also, in this day and age, when we seem to want to just join tribes and beat the crud out of each other, I also want to say, these people have changed my life. They're very good at what they do. They're fascinating. They're smart. They're talented. But the point I make, I don't really talk about them in this piece, but just to set the background, the meeting I keep referring to is in a very super modern, sleek, clean place. And I always say the people smell just kind of citrusy. So I'll just read this piece from Hunker, but just so that I don't forget to say too. So you and I have talked, I do different things. I have 2 books forthcoming, one from HarperCollins, one from Source Books. So I still sign book contracts and work with major publishers, but there are certain books, and Hunker's one of them, where I'm almost better off just to go the independent route. So I do an independent publishing thing, and this book is available. Any bookstore can get it because it's available through a distributor called Ingram, and they distribute nationwide. But there's a pretty good shot it won't be on the shelf. You may have to ask for it. And then, of course, It's available on Amazon, and it's available. We sell signed copies at sneezingcow.com. I just bring that up.
Yeah, I say go to Sneezing Cow.
Yeah, and honestly, if you go to sneezingcow.com and go to the store and find the book, there are links to these other places, and all this is explained. I just like to mention it because sometimes, if people aren't super familiar with the industry, they assume that just because a book exists, it's in every bookstore in America. And
right.
That's not always. Yeah. So, all right. Enough of that. So I'm going to dive into this little piece that references my meetings with citrusy smelling people in shiny places in LA. First thing I did this morning was dive into a spruce tree while trying to catch a chicken. What I could tell you is, don't do that. That's a shout out to my brothers. That's how we talk, man. My kids will hear me on the phone go, yeah, well, anyways, well, I'll see you down there later, I guess. We'll probably come by in the afternoon or whatnot. And my kids will go, are you talking to your brothers? Yeah. So first thing I did this morning was dive into a spruce tree while trying to catch a chicken. What I would tell you is, don't do that. It's a deceptive tree, the spruce. Its boughs drape downward in a graceful sweep. The word boughs itself, with the GH dissipating into thin air, conjures softness and breeze. One imagines plunging in only to be lowered gently to the ground as if in the arms of mother. Turns out there's lumber in there, lumber of a sharp sort. I emerged with a red scrape traversing my pate from fore to aft. I knew better, of course. Boughs notwithstanding, it is, after all, a pine tree, needles, branches, bark, etc. But have you ever stepped out into the golden morn with your day all carefully planned and then wound up having to chase a chicken around and around in the dew, gnats, and humidity? By the time she ducked beneath that spruce, I had worked myself into an antisocial and anaerobic state, which may have clouded my thinking. It was one of those situations where you're grateful there were no witnesses. But then my first thought, as I felt the sting of sweat seeping into my scored scalp, was, I'm going to have to explain this all week long. I rarely mourn my departed hair. By the time it began falling out, I had other priorities. But there are two instances in which I dearly miss it. One is when I am seated beneath an air conditioning vent. The other is when I pull a doofus move like headbutting a conifer. You fully follicled folks can tattoo the score of cats on your scalp and no one will be the wiser. But let me forget to duck for the furnace duct or craniate an open cupboard door, and the whole world reads the story on my dome. I first realized this back in the freshly bald days when I gouged my head on a protruding roofing nail in my garage. Later that week, 2 different people asked how I hurt myself. I was baffled until they pointed to my head, and I realized my clumsiness was inscribed for all to see. I have a series of meetings this week, relatively important meetings, not involving state secrets or cryptocurrency regulation or modeling contracts, but meetings in which I hope to convey some minimal competence, and in at least a couple of cases, convey that competence to someone I've not met before. I should probably explain the head wound right up front, provide context. Although here, just a few hours out, I'm puzzling over exactly how one frames the phrase, I ran into a tree while chasing a chicken, in such a way that it instills trust, confidence, and investment. There's some irony in the fact that one of the meetings is related to intellectual property. It is possible the parties across the table will look at my head and doubt I possess any.
Man, that is brilliant. That is just brilliant. That's just, I love the way, and obviously I love the way you think because you're taking
like
those,
this.
Yeah, those ordinary things, and it's just brilliant.
Well,
man,
plus,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, plus, and you will relate to this with the show that you do, with the writing you do. There is that one little cheat code thing about being a writer or a producer of content, which is when you do run your head into the tree and you realize you've cut your scalp and you're done sweating and swearing, your next thought is, well, that's this week's column. So,
yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So how can we help you, Michael? What can we do?
Oh, man. First of all, just thanks. It's such a pleasure. I truly enjoy these conversations we've had. because as you and I have talked off the air and on the air, it's a time when people just seem to want to find out what's wrong with each other and beat it to death. And, I live in an area where not everybody that I work beside or am on the fire department with thinks the way I do, or sees the world the way I do, or votes the way I do, but we still talk and we work together. And I hate to say desperate, but a little bit desperate just to maintain those conversations. And I feel like that's what we do here. I mean, so first of all, just thank you to anybody who is thoughtful and reflective and doesn't assume immediately that they're right and I'm wrong, or vice versa. Lately I've taken it in some of my live performances. I just tell people, especially if they're new audiences that haven't heard me, I just go, I'm not here to convince you anything. All right, you can do that on your own. So I love the way that these interviews flow. We never talk about it ahead of time. There's no plan. We just go where it takes us, and it's lovely. We're back in the implement store shooting the breeze.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And then as far as how you can help me, well, first of all, I have just so many things to be grateful for, and there are many others in the world. I just my daughter had a bad day the other day, and we talked about it and worked it out. And she's a good kid. She gets context, and we talked about, even on our any given bad Tuesday, there's millions of people in the world who would give all they have to have our bad Tuesday. Right. So all that said, if you want, the joke I've been using lately, it's not a joke actually, is I don't beg for help or anything, but I do have one daughter in college and one daughter in braces. And so if you're a parent, you know what that means. So if you go to sneezingcow.com, there's several things you'll find at sneezingcow.com. There's a blog, although it gets updated, but it's mostly events and that sort of thing. But there's a store page where you can see all the books and CDs and recordings.
Michael Perry voicemail.
And then there's Michael Perry voicemail, which is it's a weekly. It shows up in your email. Everybody and their brother has a podcast right now. I wouldn't call it a podcast, but it's recorded, and it's kind of like the columns. It's about 6 to 8, 10 minutes long max, and 2 months or 2 weeks of the year, I read a short piece like out of Hunker, and I talk about it a little bit, like how did I come up with this piece, and then 1 week a month I do a brand new piece, a Roughneck Grace piece, and then a new thing I've started lately that I'm getting great feedback on is 1 episode a month. I just start talking about something and see where it goes, and that has worked out. So that's a Substack thing, and it's Michael Perry's voicemail. Honestly, I'll just everything you need, including links to the Instagram and Facebook, where some people prefer to follow through that. You can do that. But sneezingcow.com, that's the place to start. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, my friends know that I am a promoter, and I'm a promoter of Michael Perry. I mean, when the new Elvis movie came out, that just gave me another opportunity to tell people about the greatest essay I've ever read about Elvis. And remind me again which book that is in.
That one is in Off Main Street.
Off Main Street.
Off Main Street, yep.
Because I'm just telling you, because I tell people, I said, think about how many things have been written about Elvis. And so, and I said, this guy has written, it's the best essay, the best understanding of why Elvis happened and why he still is. It's brilliant. Thank you. Anyway, thank you for being here, buddy. And anything we can ever do to help, you just give us a call, send up a smoke signal, something.
I appreciate that. I'll send you a copy of that new book as soon as I've got one. And then, if I'm ever, swinging down your way, I may ask you for help with a fishing pole. Yeah,
well, listen, we're trying to come up with some way that you have to come down here.
Okay.
And so we're going to get that done. So everybody just wait on the announcement that Michael Perry's down here, because we're going to get him down here at some point.
It'd be great.
Thank you, buddy. Talk soon.
Thank you. You bet.
I'm Andy Andrews, the professional noticer, harnessing common sense and wisdom to plow through challenges all the way to an answer for you. And I think that'll do it for this week. Get us out of here, Matthew. So, ladies and gentlemen, and to the boys and girls who aspire to become ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of another episode of The Professional Noticer. In a world where common sense has become a superpower, I'm harnessing that tiny bit of mental energy I have for you, seeking wisdom, making observations, and endeavoring to answer tough questions in a way that will empower your family and your business. I'm Andy Andrews. Until next week, goodbye. This episode of The Professional Noticer was produced by Matt Limpert. The Noticer theme written and performed by Sugarcane Jane. Vicks Vapor Rub for the cast and crew provided by Twinkle and Smoke of Beverly Hills. Additional funding provided by StuffedAnimals.com. Are you tired of the same old meat and potatoes dinner? Have you eaten enough sandwiches to last a lifetime of lunches? Now's the time to take advantage of the new culinary sensation, StuffedAnimals.com. Taking our cue from the Thanksgiving turkey, StuffedAnimals.com has created new choices for your menu. Citrus stuffed pheasant is one of our favorites, as is oyster stuffed quail, but it is with mammals where we really shine. Possum stuffed with onions and sweet potatoes is delectable, or substitute the possum with a raccoon. The stuffing is the same. For the armadillo option we call possum on the half shell, there's a $5 upcharge. Whether you're feeding 50 people and need a cornbread dressing stuffed pig, or it's dinner for two with a cranberry pecan stuffed squirrel, StuffedAnimals.com has the meal for you. That's StuffedAnimals.com. They're not just for cuddling anymore.